Greetings, loves. It is I, Tacticool Girlfriend. So glad to have you back here on the channel. Today, I'm going to be discussing a topic that is often neglected, yet one of the most fundamental and basic aspects of owning a firearm, and that is how to clean a firearm. Namely, in today's video, I will be discussing how to clean pistols. I want to start by saying that every firearm is unique, and how you maintain and clean each one may vary from model to model. Take into account the metallurgy, construction, and general design features between each one, and always consult the manual first and foremost for care instructions. One especially critical aspect of determining how you clean your firearm is going to be the ammunition that you use with it. Between dirty burning powders and corrosive ammunition, these may all greatly affect how you approach this. Another obvious factor, but one that bears mentioning, is how many rounds you've shot between each clean. The more rounds that you shoot, the dirtier your gun will get. Another factor that may greatly affect how much you clean your gun, as well as the products that you use with it, is going to be your environment. If you're living in a particularly humid environment, you're going to want to make sure that your gun is well lubricated and coated in that lubricant in order to prevent corrosion. If you're living in a particularly cold environment, you're going to probably want to use a denser, thicker lubricant and/or grease to help survive those cold temperatures. How often you clean your firearm is going to be a very subjective decision that you need to make for yourself. Most well-made contemporary firearms can operate pretty dirty for a while so long as they are well lubricated. However, I personally expect the best performance and reliability out of all my guns, and for this reason, I generally advocate for cleaning your gun after every shoot. I've had a lot of people tell me that there's more than one way to skin a cat. I don't know why you'd ever want to do that, but I do understand why people are generally intimidated by the dizzying array of products available to clean your guns with. If you are looking for specifically a separate solvent and lubricant product, I generally recommend the Hops 9 system. If you are looking for an all-in-one solution, I'm a big fan of the Slip 2000 gun lube, as well as the Break-Free CLP. Alright, so switching views here, we are going to talk about, first of all, prepping the workspace. Here I have a neoprene mat set on my bench to specifically create a softer surface so that things don't roll around as easily, as well as something to absorb all the nasty weird chemicals that you're going to be using. If you are using a dedicated workbench, that's great. If you are not, I definitely recommend wiping the area down when you're done just to prevent any weird contaminants from leaching into other things you don't want them to. Once we have our workspace established, we're going to need a few things. Obviously, first of all, you're going to need the gun that you're going to clean. Here I have my CZP-10C, which was in the rain all weekend when I was shooting with it. Definitely want to give that a good scrubbing. Then we need some sort of solvent and lubricant. Here again, I use the all-in-one Break-Free CLP. Then I'm going to need a brush to get out any obstinate fouling that may have found itself in the gun. I'm going to need a pick to help guide patches around awkward to reach areas. Then I'm going to need a cleaning rod. This one has a jag on it to run the patches through, as well as a bore brush to help scrub the barrel. Then I have some Q-tips, once again, to help scrub some of the more awkward to reach areas, and my cleaning patches. And of course, last but not least, we need gloves. Don't be gross. This stuff is nasty. There is lead residue as well as all sorts of other weird chemicals. So you just want to make sure that you are keeping yourself nice, neat, and tidy. And even if you wear gloves, you should still wash your hands afterwards. All right, so we got the gloves on. We're ready to get started. The first thing that we need to do here is the most crucial step, and that is making sure that your firearm is clear and unloaded. So I'm going to do that. Check down the magwell, chamber, magwell, chamber, magwell, chamber. It is clear. Great. All right, all clear. Also got my mags here. I'm going to start disassembly. Pull back, release the levers for the takedown, and take out the guide rod, recoil spring assembly, and the barrel. And that's it, easy peasy. Now, as for the mags, you may want to clean these occasionally. It's probably not necessary to do it every single time, and it's just good to get into the habit of actually running these through a light cleaning every once in a while. All right, so we're gonna move that to the side for now. Now, as we approach the cleaning of the gun, we need to assess exactly how dirty this is. That's going to inform your general approach. Some people like to scrub their guns dry. They don't need to necessarily put any patches on everything and wet it and make a sloppy mess if it's just been lightly shot occasionally. if you're trying to do something a little bit more in depth, I do recommend using some brush and combination with solvent. In this case, I am going to do a little bit of wet brushing just to help get some of this stuff moving on here. There's a lot of fouling and nasty weirdness going on there. So I'm going to start by putting a cleaning patch on the brush. I'm going to wet it just a tiny bit here with some CLP. Less is more in this situation. You don't want a really goopy mess. And I'm just going to kind of give it a really nice general wipe down along the rails of the slide, just to start picking up some of the weird gunk and goo that you got in there. One thing you really want to make sure that you don't do is get the breech face very wet with any lubricants or solvents. You want to make sure that nothing is oozing into the striker or firing pin channel there and helping it collect even more dirt in the long term. All right, that's a good initial scrubbing and wetting of the slide. Moving over to the lower here, we're going to do the same thing on the rails especially. Working inside there on the lug. Moving back to the sear and other rails here. Just making sure that we get the CLP in the dirtiest areas and get it to start breaking down some of that nasty stuff. All right, good enough. Next thing I want to do is actually start working on this barrel. I'm going to first want to get the inside of it wet with some CLP, so I'm going to run a patch, get it on my jag here. All right, and apply a little bit of CLP on that. You're just trying to basically soak the barrel again to help break down the carbon and other residue that is in there. Just push it on through. Great. Let that do its thing. I'm also going to reuse this patch because it's going to be gnarly here in a second. And just give the entire thing a nice wipe down here. Awesome. Great. One really important thing is to get the feeding ramp here. You want that nice and polished for the best feeding performance that you can give it. The areas that sit in the breech are usually the dirtiest, so you want to be extra thorough and judicious with your use here. Great, that's good enough there. Also going to give the guide rod and recoil spring assembly a very light coating of CLP on another patch here. Awesome, great. And then I'm going to move on here. We're going to start trying to brush away some of this carbon residue. You don't need to necessarily wet the brush at all. And if you want to, you can just kind of coat it a little bit with some of the latent CLP that you have on your fingers here. And I'm just going to give everything a really good scrub down. Again, helping remove any obstinate bits of residue that are still sticking here. Try to get into those little nooks and crannies, making sure that you are also being especially good about getting the extractor clean. That is one common point of failure, is a failure to eject. So definitely want to make sure that that is very tidy. Also get the face of the slide here, since that gets a lot of the backblast from your shots. Good to keep that clean. Moving on to the lower here, again, giving it a nice thorough brushing all the way through. Be very, very thorough about getting under the rails on the sides here. Those are very crucial spots that you want to make sure are very clean and clear of debris. Moving on to the magwell, I'm also going to give that a good scrubbing. You're going to want to make sure that you are thoroughly clearing any debris there that might interfere with mag feeding and ejection. All right, and from here, I'm actually going to start working on the magazines themselves, doing the same thing, just kind of brushing around on the inside and on the outside. Especially focus on these feeding lips here. Those are crucial areas and some of the dirtiest spots on the magazine itself. And again, you're not trying to do this so it's clean enough to eat off of. You're just simply trying to make sure that ultimately there's no obstructions that are going to interfere with the performance. Move on to the magazine springs and followers here. Followers especially tend to get a little dirty. Not the end of the world if they do. I am just a stickler for this and like to get it as clean as possible while I'm at it. Get the springs down here as well. Now, I'm going to scrub a bit on the actual barrel exterior. Again, trying to just make sure I'm clearing anything that might be sticking around there, loosen everything up, so it's easier to mop up when we're done here. Paying, again, very close attention to the feeding ramp. All right, looking good there. And recoil spring assembly. Awesome. That should do it. Next thing we're going to want to do is set up the bore brush on my cleaning rod here. And we're going to just run that through the barrel. Probably do roughly 5 to 10 times is usually going to be sufficient. Just run it through one end to the other. Let it do its thing. Got my jag set back up, and we're going to want to do a little bit more detail work on the rest of the little areas that we didn't get to earlier. Just very lightly applying a little bit of CLP here. I'm going to get into those little small areas on the lower here, in the trigger assembly and sear. You don't want these areas too soaking wet, otherwise it will attract more debris in the long run. Everything in moderation here. Gonna do the same exact thing with the slide here. One thing to note, we are not removing the striker from the slide today. That is something that you can do on a rare occasion if you really want to. If you really need to strip this thing down, or if it's having any issues, or you just want to do a deep, detailed clean. But for regular maintenance, you shouldn't need to do a full disassembly here. This should be sufficient. Get a little bit here around where the barrel rests. Great. And where the recoil spring assembly rests as well. Excellent. Okay. Now that your gun's gotten a good scrubbing, we're going to move on to mopping everything up. So we're going to clean up that mess by using, yet again, more patches. This is where the pick comes in. Gonna just kind of guide this around here, swabbing up anything that I have left over. You don't want any surfaces to remain wet that you don't need to. That will be in our lubrication phase near the end here, when we intentionally lubricate the surfaces that actually need to be. Everything else should be relatively dry. Scrub into those rails very thoroughly. Pick up any leftovers there. Great. Get to the extractor there as well. It's not rocket science, just trying to wipe everything down. Moving on to the lower, doing the same thing. If your patch is really dirty, you'll want to replace that right now. I think this has a little bit more mileage on it, so I'm just going to continue doing what I'm doing. Wiping the whole thing down. One thing you do want to keep in mind is that if you did use a solvent instead of a CLP, you're especially going to want to be thorough in this step. You want to make sure that there is no remaining solvent left that can cause additional wear on your gun when it doesn't need to be. Get a clean patch here. Move on to the barrel, wipe that down. Now that we have the barrel, we also want to make sure that we are going to wet it a little bit more and run a patch through. Cycle that as many times as you need to until it's very clean. Doesn't need to be perfect, but you are going to see that there is certainly a bit of carbon buildup there. So you just want to make sure that you are cleaning that. After putting a wet patch through, you're going to do a dry patch to pick up the rest of that CLP and alternate as necessary here. We're going to make sure that the barrel is at least reasonably clean here, as that is a very crucial point. Yeah, and that didn't take much. It's already clean enough, I think. Run one more dry patch through, just to mop up the excess. And that's it. Great. Gonna take that last remaining dry patch I just used and wipe up the recoil spring assembly here. Doesn't need to be too soaking wet here. Great. All right. I'm going to also take a dry patch and wipe down anything that might be left on the magazine internals and the magazines themselves. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. You're just trying to get most of the stuff off of it. Again, line those feeding lips here. Definitely want to make sure those are clean more than anything else in the magazine. All right, another thing I've done here is gotten a loop assembly attached to my cleaning rod and put a clean patch through here. I'm just going to give a good wipe down to the interior of the mag well, making sure that there's nothing in there that might be gross, that seeped in, that will help collect dust and debris. Just kind of run that through. Great. And I'm going to do the same thing for the interior of the magazines. Again, we want everything that we don't need to be wet to be nice and dry here. Just like the first time, I'm also going to use Q-tips to dry up all the nooks and crannies after I've wetted them with the CLP. Getting into all those little spots that are hard to reach with the patches, just making sure that there's nothing pooling up in there that doesn't need to be there. Also going to make sure that I'm trying to dry off the breech face here. Like I said before, we want to make sure that that's not soaking wet. Don't want anything seeping into that striker channel. Alright, so we are ready to lubricate. If you're using a separate oil, this would be the time to do so. Otherwise, use your CLP because you might just be a simple person like me and just not even want to think about this. We're going to want to make sure that we're coating all the surfaces of mechanical contact that you have in your firearm. This is largely going to be any surfaces that you do see some visible wear. Those are the hot spots that you definitely want to make sure are very well lubricated here. Otherwise, I would generally advise that you don't lubricate this thing any more than you need to. Just the points of mechanical contact, like the rails. So I will start with the rails, just applying a drop here and there. Very, very tiny drops on the slide rails here. And then I'm going to use a Q-tip to help evenly distribute that. That's a dirty one, we're not going to use that. And just kind of glide it along nice and even. Easy peasy. Again, telltale sign is going to be any spots where you see the finish worn. You're also going to want to coat those too, such as here and right here. Beautiful. All right, moving on to the lower. Same thing, get the sides of those rails where there is contact, just a few drops here and there. And a little bit here on the lug, and that should mostly do it. Make sure to get the top of the rails too, don't ignore those. That looks great to me. As for the slide, I'm also going to get it just a little bit oiled here. I use my fingers for this part just to get it nice and even. Again, you're going to see some of those points of wear here, so you're going to want to make sure that you get a little bit of lubrication on that point too. Great. Do the same thing with the recoil assembly, just a couple drops here and there. Just trying to give a really nice, very thin film to it all over. Arguably this part doesn't really need it, but I do like to get it a little bit lubricated just to be safe. One often overlooked thing to do is if you have a weapon light, you want to make sure to clean the face of that to make sure that there's nothing building up on there that is impeding the light from actually shining as bright as it can. Okay, so we're completely done cleaning and lubricating the gun. All we need to do now is reassemble it and do a function check. One thing I also like to make sure that I do is rack the slide a bunch of times to make sure that I'm evenly distributing all that lubricant on the slide. Alright, we're also going to reassemble the magazines. Okay, everything is back together in one piece, so now is the time to do a function check. I'm actually going to load one of these magazines with a dummy round so I can test ejection, but first let's rack the slide and make sure that it actually would fire if it had a live round in it. Great. Trigger resets and everything. Awesome. As it should. Next I'm going to actually load this mag in. Now I'm going to try to eject the rounds. It ejects successfully. Magazine locks back. I can eject the magazine too. Slide release works. Awesome. Yay, we're set. This is it. Okay, so the initial functions check is complete. What I'm going to do now is just wipe everything down, get all the excess goo out of there on the exterior of the gun, making sure that it's really nice and clean for me to handle without gloves. Do the same thing with the magazines, of course, making sure that those are also dry and clean. Don't want that collecting any dust in any holsters or the gun itself. Okay, now I can actually take my gloves off, so I will do that right now. Alright, so the gloves are off, but I'm not done just yet. If your gun uses any batteries, you're going to want to check the charge on those to make sure they're at an acceptable level. This gun uses a Tacticool RMR optic. However, I can't check the batteries on this without taking the entire optic off, so I have a schedule to replace that. However, it does have a Streamlight TLR 7A. I can take the battery out of this pretty easily, so I'm going to check that right now. Alright, looking great. I'll call that good. Once again, we're going to want to do a function check on the light as well. Boop, boop. Another thing you want to check is your actual glass on the optic. In this case, I do want to give the RMR a little bit of a wipe down here with a Q-tip, just to make sure I got as much clarity as I possibly can. If it's too dirty for just a dry wipe, I would suggest using some sort of glasses cleaner or rubbing alcohol here. Looks great. Excellent. An often overlooked thing is going to be your holster. You want to make sure that there's no dust bunnies, dirt, grime, sand, mud, whatever you have in the holster itself. You want to make sure that you can get a good clean seat and draw with the holster. So I'm going to run a cleaning patch on the cleaning rod through the loop and just give it a general light scrubbing here, just to make sure there's no obstructions. Okay, that should do it. That is a clean gun. So that wraps up my tutorial on how to clean a pistol. I hope for the more experienced shooters out there that this was a good review, and for the newcomers out there that this was very insightful for you. I also want to give a big shout out to all my supporters on Patreon. Your assistance to this project is endlessly appreciated. Check out some of their names at the end of this video. If you want to pitch in, just go to patreon.com/tacticalgf. Thank you so much. And so that wraps it up for today. I really appreciate you all tuning in, and as always, please take care. Bye!